We okay back there?
Yeah, sorry.
All right, we're good? Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure no one was dying.
I'm always dying, so you know.
Well, we all are, really.
Yeah.
Everything, spiritually, if nothing else. Okay. So, I want to start today by talking a little bit about the audio clip that I was playing at the beginning of the class and why I chose to play a reggae song rather than a sample of medieval Ethiopian music. Now, part of this is just because reggae is a hell of a lot easier to find on YouTube. But this is also to demonstrate, like much like the case with the thrash metal album that we played related to Dante last time, this is a text that still has a lot of resonance in East Africa and in the East African diaspora more broadly. Right? Does everybody know what a diaspora is? What it means when I use this word? What's a diaspora? When you refer to a diaspora, what are you talking about? I will take your generalized silence to suggest that this word is unfamiliar.
A wide range or variety of something, cultures and stuff.
Not quite. What a diaspora refers to is the sort of spreading out of a single people. Right, of a single culture from its place of origin. But when they get to new places where they settle, right, they are typically a minority community and they maintain a coherent cultural identity, right? So when we refer to an East African diaspora or an Ethiopian diaspora, right, we are talking about people of Ethiopian descent who do not live in Ethiopia, but maintain some kind of cultural connection to the homeland, right? You know, we also sometimes talk about, you know, a Jewish diaspora or an Irish American or an Irish diaspora, right? These are people who still think of themselves as members of that community, but they do not live in the original homeland. And this particular text has a great deal of importance, in particular, to people of African descent living in the Caribbean, especially in Jamaica. Right? It's a sacred text for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, but it is also a sacred text for people who are part of the Rastafarian movement. Have any of you heard of Rastafarianism before? Okay, yeah, okay, so what do you know about it? What do you know about Rastafari? If anything. Is it just a familiar word?
Yes, what are the
Well, don't they believe the higher one gets physically, is the belief that you're connecting with God spiritually?
Sort of, but that's not how it's connected really to this text, to this idea. There's a broader complex of ideas there that don't have anything to do with weed. So, Rastafarianism is in some ways how the Ethiopian Orthodox Church sort of takes a different shape in the New World in the context of the slave trade, right? You have people who are taken from Africa to the Caribbean to work as slaves on sugar plantations, and they take traditional Ethiopian sort of Judeo-Christian based beliefs and transform it into something new, right? So Zion, which we see referred to in the song, we heard referred to in the song, and we see referred to several times within this particular text, refers to a state of unity and a kind of, paradise. It's also associated with their place of origin, right? So Zion is not literally Ethiopia, but it's often symbolically associated with Ethiopia, right? It's about associated with going back to the homeland. And Zion is opposed to Babylon, right? Babylon is the place of wickedness, oppression, and slavery. Right? So they find themselves in Babylon, and their goal is to get themselves back to Zion, right? So the lyrics from the song are taken from Psalm 137, in which the psalmist is, speaking of, sitting by the rivers of Babylon, being in exile, right? A lot of the imagery that Rastafarians draw on is taken from the Jewish scriptures, in particular those that relate to the exile and captivity in Babylon, right? Does anybody know what the word Zion actually literally refers to, what Zion is?
Ship? No, ship.
It's not a ship, no. Zion is actually a hill. It's one of the hills on which the city of Jerusalem is built. So to go back to Zion is to go back to Jerusalem for the Jews in exile, right? Babylon is the place of exile. So home, place of exile, right? That's the imagery that's adopted. Now here, in this particular text, the word Zion is used in a rather specialized way, right? To refer to wherever the Ark of the Covenant happens to be. Right? Wherever the Ark is, that's Zion. That's where Zion rests, and that's where God's covenant resides, right? Wherever the Ark is, that's where Zion is. So, did any of you know that there is a church in Ethiopia that claims to have the Ark of the Covenant in its possession? Okay, Wallace, you knew this? Do you know anything about the story? Do you know anything about this particular?
Not fully. I know you can't see it.
Yeah, they won't let you go in, right? They won't let you go into where the Ark is kept and see it. But they do, once a month, take it out, wrap it in cloths, and do a procession around the city, right? And then take it back to the church. You still don't actually see the Ark itself, it's covered. But they do these monthly processions, right? Now all of this takes place in a city called Axum. And Axum is not so much a city anymore as it is a large town. It's got a population of about 55,000 people, so it's like, roughly speaking, like 4 times the size of Americus. But in the first millennium of the Common Era, Axum was the center of a wealthy, important, and powerful empire. Right, so from about the year 100, to the year 940, Axum was a very, very wealthy trading city. And it was ruled by a dynasty that claimed descent from King Solomon of Jerusalem. Right? They spoke a language called Ge'ez. We'll get some why that's important in a moment. But by the year 900 or so, the Aksumite Empire is in decline, it's falling apart, and it's replaced functionally, if not necessarily legally yet, around the year 900 by a dynasty of kings who call themselves the Zagwe, who are not related to the Solomonic dynasty and have a sort of an entirely different origin story and story of their own legitimation, right? So the Zagwe kings rule till about 1270, when they're replaced by a dynasty that actually comes out and calls itself the House of Solomon. And the House of Solomon rules from the year 1270 for 900 years. Wait, not 900, that's 700 years. I'm not good at math. 700 years until 1974. Right, so this is a very, very stable government for a very long time, right? And it's in the 14th century, in the relatively early period of the rule of the House of Solomon, that this book first appears, right? Now, the House of Solomon legitimizes itself in part by claiming descent from this earlier Aksumite dynasty, even though Aksum is no longer the country's capital, and by stressing the connection to the lineage of King Solomon, right? So they claim to be the descendants of Menelik, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Now, according to their narrative, right, according to what we read here, how many other sons does King Solomon have?
2.
Yeah, he's got 2 sons, right? And who's older? Yeah. So Menelik is not just the son of King Solomon. He is, according to this tradition, the oldest son of King Solomon, the first son, and therefore is the real inheritor of the Israelites' covenant with God, right? Menelik and Rehoboam, who is the king who succeeds Solomon in the Book of Kings, in the Bible, right, are the only 2 sons of Solomon, according to the Kebra Nagast, according to this narrative. And from Rehoboam are descended, again, according to this lineage, not in actual history, the emperors of Rome. From Menelik, the elder son, are descended the emperors of Ethiopia. So if you look on page 538, parts 19 and 20 here, right? How this book came to be found and the division of the earth. Can I get a volunteer to read first part 19 here for us? How this book came to be found. Anybody go ahead. Yep, you're always the first to volunteer. Yep, page 538.
Oh, 538.
Yep.
Someone else can start it.
And
I'm still looking for my place.
Go ahead, Taylor. Thank you.
And Demetrios, the Archbishop of Rome, said, I have found in the Church of Saint Sophia, among the books in the royal treasures, a manuscript that the whole kingdom of the world to the Emperor of Rome and the Emperor of Ethiopia.
Okay, so this book is supposed to be a justification of the royal claims of the House of Solomon, right? Right. This is why the House of Solomon has a right to rulership, not just of this land, but also of other lands. So we can see in part 20, the division of the earth. Can we get another volunteer? Are you ready now? Okay, go for it.
Is it 20?
Yep, part 20 on page 538.
From the middle of Jerusalem, and from the north thereof to the southeast is the portion of the emperor of Rome.
Yeah, Rome. They mean Rome. Yeah.
Okay, the emperor of Rome. And from the middle of Jerusalem, from the north thereof to the south and to western India is the portion of the emperor of Ethiopia. For both of them are the seed of Shem, the son of Noah, the seed of Abraham, the seed of David, the children of Solomon. There's probably a lot of those, honestly. For God gave the seed of Shem glory because of the blessing of their father Noah. The emperor of Rome is the son of Solomon, and the emperor of Ethiopia is the firstborn and eldest son of Solomon.
All right, great. Thank you, Seth. Okay, so the whole world, according to this narrative, should belong to the emperor of Rome, right? Essentially, the northern half of the world belongs to the emperor of Rome. The southern half of the world belongs to the emperor of Ethiopia. And the emperor of Ethiopia, being the elder son, has the more legitimate claim, right? Has the more powerful claim. That's the basic idea here. Now, the actual language that would have been spoken at the time the House of Solomon came to power is actually the language that is still spoken by most people in Ethiopia. It's a language called Amharic. But this book, despite the fact that no one was speaking Ge'ez really anymore, is written in Ge'ez. So what we have here is a division between what we call a hieratic language and a demotic language. Does anybody know what the Greek word demos means?
People.
Yeah, the people, right? Demos refers to the people. So a demotic language, if we think about its root, means what?
Language of the people.
Yeah, the language of the people, right? The language that's spoken by everyday ordinary citizens. And if we think about other words that sound like hieratic, what would we take hieratic to mean then?
The language of the privileged.
Yeah, or a language that is privileged in some way, right? That is special in some way, that is elevated above everyday language. So we can think of other examples, like if we think back to what we said about Dante last time we talked about the Inferno, right? Most educated people in Dante's day would have written primarily in Latin. Latin was the language of the church. It was the language of international scholarship in Europe. So Latin would have been a hieratic language, right? It's a language that nobody actually spoke, but was given a sort of privileged place in society and culture. So Dante actually writes in the Florentine dialect of Italian, which would have been a demotic language, a vernacular, right? To point to an example, a more contemporary kind of example, right? If you look at, say, legal language, right? If you're not a lawyer, right? If you're not actually trained to read contracts and things like that, can you act like if you actually try to read like the Facebook or Apple privacy agreements, can you make any sense out of it? No, because it's written in a hieratic, right? It's written in a language that only people with certain specialized education and training can actually use and understand. Right? The everyday language that we speak to each other, that's a demotic. Everybody still with me? Everybody get this? Okay. So Ge'ez becomes a hieratic language during the reign of the House of Solomon, largely to cement this connection with this earlier dynasty. And a big part of the purpose of this particular book is to show that the House of Solomon are the legitimate rulers of Ethiopia and not the Zagwe who led the intervening dynasty. Right. The Zagwe are not part of the same line of descent, they're not part of the same tradition, therefore, they are not the rightful rulers of the kingdom. The house of Solomon is. The descendants of Solomon shall rule in Ethiopia. Right, so I think before we get into talking too much about the text, one more thing to say about the language here as well. There are a lot of loan words from Arabic. In the Ge'ez version of the text. And it has been suggested that there is an Arabic manuscript that preceded this, from which this was translated. Although the Arabic manuscript itself has never been found. Right? But the presence of so many Arabic words in the manuscript suggests copy from an Arabic original. Now, there are claims that the Arabic text is itself a translation of a Coptic original. Coptic is a language that was spoken in Egypt in the first millennium of the Common Era. In fact, I don't know, have any of you ever heard of Coptic Christianity or the Coptic Church? Okay, yeah, that's the version of the Eastern Orthodox Church that is in Egypt, right? The Coptic Church. So there's no evidence that there is a Coptic original for this, but there are these constant claims being made to earlier authority, right? We've seen this sort of thing before. We've seen it with Confucius and the Analects, right? Where Confucius is actually inventing an entirely new tradition, but claiming that he's hearkening back to the values of an older society. We see this in Dante as well, right? Where Dante claims to be the inheritor of the great ancient Roman poetic tradition and claims that his own people in Florence are the heirs of the Romans and therefore of the Trojans, right? We see all the time these societies, these cultures trying to draw a line backwards to earlier and earlier and earlier societies to give themselves an air of legitimacy, right? To suggest that, we are not inventing our own traditions, our own culture. We're merely passing on the values, the texts, and the culture of an earlier society. Okay, any questions about any of this thus far? So anything that has been at all confusing or unclear? By and large, this fits pretty well into larger patterns that we've already discussed in the class, right? So what I'd like to do now is show you a short video. It's about 10 minutes long. This is that monthly procession I was telling you about from Our Lady Mary of Zion Church in Aksum, right? They take the ark out and they parade it around the streets, and by daybreak bring it back to the church. Okay, so could somebody please hit the lights? Thank you, Willis. And are you coming to life? Good. So yeah, this here is the church. Ignore the shaky camera work and the guy talking. Yeah.
The dimensions of the country don't match fully.
So what the guy was saying there is that the guy who guards the ark doesn't let anybody pass and won't tell you anything about it. So yeah, the procession occurred like these, as I said, occur once a month in the early hours of the morning before the sun has come up. And they're carrying the ark under these umbrellas. See, the priests are there. This is the ark. The way the guy's holding it kind of looks like an accordion. We can't really see what it is, but we see that it's covered in, rich cloths. And there's another guy behind him waving an incense burner. So what they're going to do is they're going to carry the ark out to a sort of public pavilion where there will be some readings from the Bible and from the Kebra Nagast. There'll be some prayers. And then as the sun comes up, they take the ark back to the church. So this is where they stop and do the readings and the prayers. Now, as the sun's coming up here, they will soon be picking the ark back up and taking it back to the church. There's one thing about the way this ceremony is being conducted that is a little bit unusual for the Ethiopian church as well. Most altars are hollow and portable, and they're built in imitation of the ark, right? They have the Ten Commandments carved onto them, and you're supposed to be able to easily pick them up and put them in a box with poles on, you carry on your shoulders, right? Much like if you've ever seen the way, the ark is usually carried, when it's represented in art or movies, things like that, right? It's usually carried by 4 priests carrying poles like this. Most altars in the Ethiopian church are designed to be carried in that way as well. You can just slide poles through it, pick it up, carry it outside, and bring it back inside.
Those folks, sun gazing.
Pardon?
Were they sun gazing?
Sun gazing?
Oh, yes.
I'm not really sure what you mean by that.
Oh, I thought they were familiar.
Sun gazing is a word. That is a word I do not know. The only people who are going to be allowed back into that sanctuary are the priests. Everybody else has to stay outside. So making their final prayers, bowing to the ark, bowing to the guardian, and then being told to buzz off. The ark is back in its place, get out of here. Alright, somebody please hit the lights. Thanks again, Alice. Come on. There we go. And before we start moving into the text as well, I do want to explain why I do spend so much time on stuff like this, and on explaining the audio clips, and on giving you all of this historical background information. Some of this is to help you better understand the text. But this is also because, I want you to understand these texts as part of a set of living cultural and historical traditions that do continue to this day, and that evolve as well, right? That don't remain static, right? I want you to see that these are not just dead words on a page. That this particular text, this particular narrative, is an important part of the cultural identity of not just one, but actually several cultural groups across the globe, right? Cultural and religious groups. So, this is part of some people's everyday lives and everyday practice, right? To us, right, it's a story. But if you are a member of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, if you are a Rastafari, right, this is part of your existence. This is part of your identity, right? All right, so does anybody have any questions about the reading or about anything that I've said about the history of this text or the Ethiopian Empire or anything else? Is there anything that you were particularly confused about or interested in? Yeah, Kathy.
In the video, why do they wear all white?
Well, white in many cultures is, it's not in all cultures, but in many cultures, is symbolic of purity. In some cultures, white is actually symbolic of death. But I think, yeah, in this case, people are wearing white, because they want to show that they're pure and clean when parading the ark around. So I think that's what's going on there. Anything else? Anything that you particularly want to know about this or that you want clarification on? Anything that surprised you about this? Yeah, Kanisha.
Okay, so I was surprised at the fact that he followed the way of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he had many wives, and he said in one of them that I forget what page it was on, that you're not supposed to have many wives.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's actually go to. You're talking about page 543, right? Those last two paragraphs.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So can you read that paragraph for us? It starts with when the queen.
And when the queen sent her message to Solomon, saying that she was about to depart to her own country, he pondered in his heart and said, "A woman of such splendid beauty had come to me from the ends of the earth. What do I know? Will God give me seed in her?" Now, as it is said in the book of Kings, Solomon, the king, was never a lover of women, and he married wives of the Hebrews and the Egyptians and the Canaanites,
Mm-hmm.
Kenites and the Edomites and the Moabites, and from the Ruth and the Kirgir and Damascus and Shurites, and women who were reported to be beautiful. And he had 400 queens and 600
Concubines.
Now this which he did was not for the sake of fornication, but as a result of the wise intent that God had, make thy seed like the stars of heaven for number, and like the sand of the sea. And Solomon said in his heart, what do I know? Peradventure, God will give me men children from each one of these women. Therefore, when he did, 38 wisely saying, my children shall inherit the cities of the enemy, and shall destroy those who worship idols.
Okay, so this is making an explanation, right, for why Solomon had 400 wives, 600, like it said 1,000 household women, right? The idea here is that he can thus breed the pagans out of existence, right? If all of his 400 wives and 600 concubines bear him a child, right, they will spread to the ends of the earth, they will tear down all the false idols, and Abraham's, like the seed of Abraham, right? The seed of Abraham's covenant with God will rule everywhere. And everybody will be brought under the sway of the Israelite religion. So that's the purpose that is given to Solomon here, right? Now, as it happens, he has only 2 sons who have to divide the world between them. But if we look at the following paragraph, I think this is what you were talking about where you saw contradiction, right? We look at, now those early peoples lived under the law of the flesh, for the grace of the Holy Spirit had not been given unto them. And to those who lived after Christ, it was given to live with one woman under the law of marriage. And the apostles laid down for them an ordinance, saying, all those who have received his flesh and his blood are brethren, their mother is the church, and their father is God, and they cry out with Christ whom they have received, saying, Our Father who art in heaven. So, the explanation here given as to why it was okay for Solomon to do that, right, is that things changed, right, when, after the coming of Christ and the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, right? The rules changed then. So it's actually an acknowledgement that the rules and traditions do change and evolve over time. And that for Solomon's time, right, what he was doing was both acceptable and perfectly logical, even if it didn't pan out quite the way he wanted it to. But after the coming of Christ, the rules are different. The rules change, right? The apostles have given us different laws to live under. And so the old laws, the laws of the flesh no longer apply. But no, good question. Good question. I'm glad you brought that up. Other questions? Anything else? Anything else that you guys want to know about? Or that you want to discuss?
Super minor. But I thought it was kind of interesting how here it says that Solomon had 600 concubines and 400 wives, but over in the Bible it says 700 wives, 300 concubines. So little differences there. I know that's like a super minor nitpicky difference.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I kind of wanted to point it out.
Yeah, and each different branch of Christianity has its own sacred books, right? Have you ever looked at a Catholic Bible and a Protestant Bible side by side? I'm going to take your general silence to mean no. Okay. The first thing you will note is that the Catholic Bible is longer, right? The Catholic Bible contains several books that are not to be found in Protestant Bibles. The Catholic Bible also excludes a number of books that are referred to as apocrypha, right? Which means something like things that have been thrown away, right? When the Council at Nicaea got together and decided what the actual canon would be, right, which books actually belonged in the Bible, there were certain books that were popular among early Christians, including several Gospels, right? There are many more Gospels beyond the 4 that are in the official Bible. The Council of Nicaea decided were of dubious origin, or contained beliefs that might be heretical, right? That might be quite mainstream, that would not be either safe or useful for Christians to read. So they put those texts off to the side. Now, some of those texts do become canon in other Christian traditions. For example, if you look at the Ethiopian Church's Bible, there's a book in that Bible called the Book of Jubilees that was really, really popular among Jewish and Christian communities around the time of Christ, but doesn't make it into any of the other official Bibles. The Kebra Nagast is not considered part of the Bible, but it is considered a separate sacred book that tells a complementary kind of narrative, right? A good analogy might be something like the Book of Mormon, right? It's not part of the Bible. The only people who regard it as a sacred text are members of this one particular sect, right? But it provides a narrative that sort of gives the origins of their particular sect, that intersects with the biblical story. So, what the Kebra Nagast is really doing is kind of building on a few references in the Book of Kings, right, when Solomon meets the Queen of Sheba, and in a couple of the prophetic books. Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah refers to Jewish communities living in East Africa. So, this book is kind of building on those little, just those little things that are dropped in the Hebrew Bible. All right, other questions?
Is the Queen of Sheba based on a real historical figure?
Ish. It's hard to pin her down to an actual single historical figure, especially because we don't really know all that much about what was going on in Ethiopia prior to the foundation of this Aksumite kingdom in 100 CE. We do know that the tradition the succession tradition that's referenced here, let's see, where is it? I wrote "not true" next to it, so that I remember it. Okay, right, on page 546, right? Now there was a law in the country of Ethiopia that only a woman should reign, and that she must be a virgin who had never known man, but the queen said unto us, right, that's not a real tradition, right? There is no historical evidence that this was actually the case. This is more just an explanation as to why the Queen of Sheba was single and available when she went unto Solomon in Jerusalem. So yeah, we can't really, we can't pin her down to a particular historical figure because we simply just don't know enough about anything like there's archaeological evidence of cities and of settlements, plenty of pottery shards. Archaeologists love their pottery shards, but yeah, not too much information about dynasties or kings or queens. Any other questions? What else you got? Yeah, Kathy.
I know it's gonna sound dumb, but I have talked to a few elders and sisters from the Mormon church.
Okay.
And they said that, like, I asked them, I was like, okay, so is the Book of Mormon, like, part of the Bible or, like, what? And they told me that it was, like, between the Old and New Testament, but you just said it was a sacred text. So what makes
To them.
the text sacred?
Basically, what makes a text sacred is that a particular group of people decides that it's sacred, that a particular religious group agrees, right, this text is sacred to us. So in the case of, the Bible as it's come down to us, this was a decision that was made by a council convened by the Emperor Constantine. Right? They decided which books were actually to be regarded as sacred. These were, powerful bishops, church patriarchs, things of that nature, people of that nature, not things. And yeah, they decided what the sacred books were going to be. Now, the Book of Mormon is actually sort of part of the Mormon Church's origin story. Right? There's a story about the discovery of these golden plates, and that Joseph Smith went into his farmhouse and translated them and all that, right? That it was a sort of direct revelation to him from God. The Kebra Nagast is different in that they claim that this is in fact a translation of earlier texts that could be found, right? Well, actually, the story of the discovery of the book is a little bit similar, right? Now, in the Mormon narrative, an angel points out to Joseph Smith, like, hey, dig here, right? And in the Kebra Nagast narrative, right, a bishop finds a book in a chest, right, and translates it. So there is a kind of similarity there, but this is more sort of found by coincidence rather than by divine direction or obvious divine direction, if that makes sense. So yeah, essentially, to get back to the original question, it's like, yeah, what makes a book sacred is that a particular group of people decides that it's sacred to them. You could conceivably, have a society of people who decide that, we're going to worship Albus Dumbledore from the Harry Potter books, and we are going to make our sacred texts, right, the 5 canonical Harry Potter novels, right? None of this extra stuff, right? No Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, no Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, right? Our canon is just the Harry Potter novels themselves. And as long as they agree that that's their sacred text, then that text is sacred to them. So sacredness is, in a way, a kind of cultural construct. And a lot of it depends on what you believe about a particular text, right? So, for example, the idea that the Gospels are divinely inspired, divinely revealed, right? Did that help? Okay. Anything else? Anything else you guys want to know about here? Let's talk a little bit here about the way Menelik, who's the central figure in the narrative, is described, right? If we look on page 546, right, we have the growth of the child, right, the development of the child. And the child grew, and she called his name Beinallechem. This is Menelik. And the child reached the age of 12 years, and he asked his friends among the boys who were being educated with him, and said unto them, Who is my father? And they said unto him, Solomon the king. And he went to the queen his mother, and said unto her, O queen, make me to know who is my father. And the queen spake unto him angrily, wishing to frighten him so that he might not desire to go to his father, saying, Why dost thou ask me about thy father? I am thy father and thy mother, seek not to know any more. And the boy went forth from her presence and sat down. And a second time and a third time he asked her, and he importuned her to tell him. One day, however, she told him, asking, His country is far away, and the road thither is very difficult. Would thou not rather be here? And the youth Beinallechem was handsome, and his whole body and his members, and the bearing of his shoulders resembled those of Solomon the king. And when he was 22 years old, he was skilled in the whole art of war and horsemanship, and in the hunting and trapping of wild beasts, and in everything that young men are wont to learn. And he said unto the queen, I will go and look upon the face of my father. I will come back here by the will of God, the Lord of Israel. So this is actually sort of fairly common quest motif that we see in myths and in fairy tales. Right? You know, the hero is of a kind of mysterious origin. He pesters some elder figure to tell him what his origins really are, right? Who is my real father? Where do I come from? Right? Where am I going? All that good shit. And by the time Beinallechem / Menelik is a man, right, he has the skills necessary to go out and survive on the road, to survive out in the wilderness on the way to meet his father, whom it just so happens he looks just like, right? So she gets this merchant who first told her of Solomon to go and take her son to Jerusalem. On page 547, right? And the queen took the young man aside, and when he was alone with her, she gave him that symbol which Solomon had given her, that is to say, the ring on his finger, so that he might know his son, and might remember her word and her covenant which she had made with him, that she would worship God all the days of her life, she and those who were under her dominion, with all the power which God had given her. And then the queen sent him away in peace, right? This is also a very common motif in stories and myths, right? The idea that the lost son is to be recognized by the father by some sort of mark that the father gave the mother, right? Often a ring or a necklace or some piece of jewelry, right? This is actually sort of almost directly referencing a Persian story about the hero Rustam and his son Sohrab. Right? Rustam seduces a princess in an enemy kingdom, has to leave her, but leaves her with a ring that he says he'll one day come back for. Rustam goes back to his kingdom. The two kingdoms go to war, about a generation later. Rustam is, of course, prominent in the army of his kingdom. And he faces and kills a young man on the opposing side, whom he later sees wearing this ring. Right? So the hero realizes too late that the enemy champion that he's killed was his own son. Now, nothing so tragic happens here. The reunion between father and son is a happy one. I'm just trying to point out that this is a very common motif that can go in different directions, right, in narrative. So, would Solomon actually even have needed the ring? to recognize his son.
No. Wise man.
Well, not only that, right? But the kid looks not only just like Solomon, but also just like Solomon's father David, right? Solomon notes the resemblance that the son bears, not to himself, but to the grandfather, right? Let me see if I can find that. Right, page 548. And Joas, the son of Yodahe, went out and brought Binalechem inside. And when King Solomon saw him, he rose up and moved forward to welcome him. And he loosed the band of his apparel from his shoulder, and he embraced him with his hands resting on his breast. And he kissed his mouth and forehead and eyes. And he said unto him, Behold, my father David hath renewed his youth, and hath risen from the dead. And Solomon the king turned round to those who had announced the arrival of the young man, and he said unto them, Ye said unto me, He resembleth thee, but this is not my stature, but the stature of David my father in the days of his early manhood, and he is handsomer than I am. So, Solomon actually suggests the boy's lineage, right? The more true parent is not me, but my father, right? My father, the man who established the city of Jerusalem, the founder of our kingdom, is the real deal here, right? This is who this boy really represents. This is who this boy, or young man, he's 22 years old, right? This is who this young man really resembles. This is who he really harkens back to. And this is all really very kind of important as part of a foundation narrative, right? Remember that the whole purpose of this narrative is to give legitimacy to this house of Solomon in Ethiopia. That's the whole idea here, the whole thing that's at work, right? So, not only are they descended directly from David through Solomon, right? Thus connecting them to the foundation of Jerusalem. What else leaves Jerusalem when Binalechem does? What does he take with him back to Ethiopia? Yeah, the ark goes with him. Now, does he do this on purpose? How does the ark end up in his possession?
Some of the people that came with him, I believe, kind of stole it.
Yeah, the sons of the Jewish nobility, right, who are sent to accompany him back to Ethiopia, conceive a plan to hide the ark and bring it with them, so that they are not bereft of Zion when they are in a strange land. Right, so that, right, because remember, Zion, in the context of this tale, is wherever the ark is, right? Home is where the covenant of God resides, wherever that happens to be. So if the ark were to end up in Norway, right, somehow, Norway would be Zion. Page 550. And the children of the nobles of Israel, who were commanded to depart with the son of the king, took counsel together, saying, What shall we do? For we have left our country and our birthplace, and our kinsfolk, and the people of our city. Now come, let us establish a covenant between us only, whereof our kinfolk shall know nothing, that we will love each other in that country. None shall hasten or tarry here, and we will neither fear nor have any doubt. For God is here, and God is there, and may God's will be done. And to him be praise forever and ever. Amen. Now, covenant is always a loaded word in these kinds of narratives, right? Because what does it always harken back to? When we use the word covenant, when we hear the word covenant, What does it make us think of? Pardon?
It makes us think about the agreement between Abraham and God.
Yeah, it's right. God's covenant with Abraham, right? That God would make Abraham a father of nations, right? And so many of the stories in the Hebrew Bible are about the constant renewal and violation of that covenant, right? So anytime in a text of this nature the word covenant specifically is used, it's supposed to call that back into mind. Right? The idea of God's covenant with Abraham. And Azarias and Elmias, sons of the priests, answered, "Let not the other matter, that our kinsfolk hate us, cause us sorrow, but let us sorrow on account of our Lady Zion, because they are making us to leave her. For in her they have committed us to God, and we have served her to this day, and let us be sorrowful because they have made us to leave her. It is because of her and because of this that they have specially made us to weep." And the others answered and said unto them, "Verily she is our lady and our hope, and our object of boasting, and we have grown up under her blessedness. And how is it possible for us to forsake Zion our mistress? For we have been given to her, and what shall we do? If we resist his command, the king will kill us, and we are unable to transgress the word of our fathers and the king's command. And what shall we do concerning Zion our lady?" So the sons of the priest, right, their desire is to not lose their connection to the homeland, to their place of origin while in exile, right? They don't want to lose their connection to the divine and to the covenant while they're in exile. So that's why they intend to steal the ark. But then what happens when they actually attempt to steal it? No, they don't die. I mean, we know that, at least according to this narrative, right, the ark gets to Ethiopia, where it resides in Aksum to this day. What happens when they try to steal the ark? Yeah, they get divine assistance, right? Page 552, right? They've built this carrying box for the ark. There's a lot of very specific reference to building and lengths of wood and things like that, right? So actually very similar to the instructions that God gives Noah for the building of the ark. Both when we see Solomon building the temple and when we see these guys building a home for a new carrying box for the Ark of the Covenant. And behold, the angel of the Lord appeared again to Azarias, and he stood up above him like a pillar of fire, and he filled the house with his light. And he raised up Azarias, and said unto him, "Stand up, be strong, and rouse up thy brother Elmias, and Abessa, and Machari, and take the pieces of wood, and I will open for thee the doors of the sanctuary. And take thou the tabernacle of the law of God, and thou shalt carry it without trouble and discomfort. And I, inasmuch as I have been commanded by God to be with it forever, will be thy guide when thou shalt carry it away." So, yeah, initially they were just going to take it, right? They were going to run off with it. But, given how powerful the ark is in those biblical stories, is it likely that they would have been able to just pick it up and run off with it? Right? Think about what happens to those Nazis that try to use it in Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? Melted faces. Right. The ark does not permit such misuse. So, in order to carry it away, they have to get divine sanction. And the fact that that angel shows up and tells them, "I'm going to open the doors for you, go on in and get it," this shows that not only do they take the ark to Ethiopia, but they do so with God's blessing, right? That this is where God intends the ark to be. With this particular lineage, in this particular kingdom. Right? So Zion moves from Jerusalem to Ethiopia and legitimates the claims of the Solomonic kings who have deposed their Zagwe predecessors, and provides the basis for the spiritual claims made to this day, both by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and by the Rastafarian movement. All right, so does anybody have any questions about anything remaining here? Anything else? We have a little bit of time. If there's anything that is troubling or puzzling you. Anything else that anybody wants to know about this? You could at least wait until I say we're done to start packing up. I'm sorry, but I'm not joking. That does actually piss me off a little bit. You know, like, you could wait till I'm finished talking. Wait and make sure none of your classmates have any questions about anything before you start packing up rudely to go before you are dismissed. So if you didn't get the reading questions from last time, 1001 Nights, here they are. And since you are so keen to get the hell out of here, go ahead. It's rude.